For basically my whole life, the Minnesota Vikings have had some larger-than-life superstar. And we're so lucky that right now that guy is entirely uncontroversial. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day every single day. Today on the show, there are three superstars that have defined the last quarter century of Minnesota Vikings football: Randy Moss, Adrian Peterson, and Justin Jefferson. Of course, they are not comprehensive, but I figured this would be a good chance to tell their stories and compare what we know about them and the way that they were in Vikings football to Justin Jefferson and the way that he's been so far and how easy it is to root for him. This is part of a larger series that I've been doing. If there's like a big news item that I should be talking about right now that I'm not, it's because this is a pre-recorded episode. I'm out of town right now, so these are a big giant pre-recorded series that I did to fill the time until I get back. If there is any big giant news that you're waiting to hear me talk about, I will get to it on Monday. But for now, I want to discuss the sort of controversial natures of Randy Moss and Adrian Peterson for very different reasons and very different coverages, I would say, and appreciate, I guess, Justin Jefferson for the Sour Patch connoisseur that he is. But first, the stories and understandings of Randy Moss and Adrian Peterson, it's more than, I'm not just going to sit here and list their rap sheets. That would be stupid. They're both very complicated people, very hurt people. There's a lot of pain in their stories. And if you don't understand that pain, you can't understand the things that you may be upset about them, upset at them for, no matter how minor or major those transgressions are. With Randy Moss, I told a version of this story in my history series. This whole week has basically been a sort of appendix to my 7-part Minnesota Vikings history documentary series. It's 7 episodes, averaging an hour apiece, and they are about everything about the Minnesota Vikings from their inception, from football even well before the Vikings, professional football in Minnesota, all the way up to the end of the Mike Zimmer era, and it released in 2022, right at the beginning of the Kevin O'Connell era. John Boyce also did one a year afterwards, which I also enjoyed very much. But for mine, my Randy Moss point was a lot about how the media covered him, because how the media covered him was something that bothered him a lot. And I tried to really make mine focused on the players and their experiences. And Randy Moss's experience was very tainted by the media. And it started in not Rand, West Virginia, but in, I believe it was DuPont High School, which was, Rand was too small of a town for them to have their own high school. So he went to DuPont. At DuPont High School, this was the 90s. It was West Virginia, and it was an integrated school that felt like you were listening to stories from like 1969. As the story goes, Randy Moss, total high school superstar, him and a friend of his whose career would never take off in large part due to this, were upset with a white classmate who wrote a word on a desk that a white classmate should never write ever. I'll put it that you can fill in the blanks. And this turned into a brawl outside the school. The kid got pretty beat up, and it turned into this like big assault allegation. It was a fight between high schoolers, and it was a racially motivated, like really rough situation, right? And the way that the West Virginia media responded to this was not to engage in the complicated nuances of, violence in youth or in race relations, in asking the question, what should happen to a white classmate that writes that word on a desk, but rather to pick the most famous kid and turn him into a pariah. The coverage of Randy Moss was nasty. They smeared him. They tarnished his name. And while he did do his time, he took his charge, and the sort of debt to society was paid via the criminal justice system. A second debt to society was paid via public image. And that public image dissuaded a lot of colleges. He was not even looked at by the University of West Virginia, which he grew up rooting for, which really hurt him because he knew he was good enough. I mean, he was Randy Moss, and he knew he was Randy Moss. Everybody knew he was. This is not a situation like Justin Jefferson where nobody knew he was good till he was 19 years old. He was Randy freaking Moss, and the University of West Virginia didn't want him. He ends up getting a chance at Notre Dame, but he gets in trouble again. He ends up getting a chance at Florida, and he gets in trouble again. And he gets scholarships offered and revoked, and he ends up at Marshall. He sees, hey, he was a kid that got in a little trouble, but he grew up in one of these towns in America where everyone gets in a little trouble sometimes. But it was because he was so good at the sport that he was the one with the spotlight and the one who every little misstep and transgression would be blown out of proportion. He had I should mention, a domestic violence incident that I don't really have a lot of comfort talking about. I just don't feel like I understand the nuances of the situation well enough to discuss it. And I would encourage you to look it up on your own if you're really curious. Don't get it from me. But I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about you find a little weed in his car and it's the story of the week, the high school fight that turns into aggravated assault and a hate crime, that just doesn't match the reality. It never matched the reality. And what really bothered him is that no one got to know him. Nobody took the time to try to figure out who Randy Moss was. They only know what Randy Moss had done, what Randy Moss could do. They saw him as maybe a fantasy football style asset, as a tool the football team could use, or as a rap sheet. Those were the two things you saw Randy Moss as, and it bugged him incessantly. This explains the Randy Moss we got to know in Minnesota. Because when Randy Moss was in Minnesota, he did all kinds of antics, right? In both of his stints in Minnesota, he had straight cash homie. He squirted a water bottle on the ref. He had a cop that found a little weed in his car, and it turned into this thing where he bumped the cop all the headlines aren't run over a cop. He bumped a cop, right? These are minor issues, right? These were kind of funny altercations at best, and at worst, a bad thing, but he deserves a ticket and to kind of be sent home, right? But they would define him. They would give him the big bad D word, diva. There was also a perception that he didn't try a lot. He would dog his routes. This is because of the way he ran. He's big, tall. It would take him 3 steps to get 15 yards. And so these big, tall, lopey steps felt slow. And people would look at reps of Randy Moss running past defenders who were going full hog and then be like, he's lazy. Because it just aesthetically looked lazy. This is, I get it, right? This is something that I fell for just this draft cycle, that I went out in my initial reaction to Ty Felton. I was like, he looks like he's not really trying. But no, he's just pretty fast. And he just got by people because he's quick. And he ran a crazy 40, so it tracks. And you can listen, if you want my whole Ty Felton thing, you can listen to that, where I sort of acknowledge that and then talk about the other issues that I have with his play. But what I'll never do is attack Ty Felton's character. because of the lessons learned from the Randy Moss thing. Because I don't know Ty Felton. I don't know his character. It's too fun to take down somebody a peg to us, I think. And there's actually a great excerpt in the book that's behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it. It's called The Rest of the Iceberg, and it's written by Robert Smith, the Viking Robert Smith. And it's a lot. The book is a lot. It's very esoteric and philosophical, but he has a pretty good point about the way we perceive athletes and the standards we hold athletes to and why we hold them to those standards. That'll be next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you've ever wished managing your money felt easier with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're trying to grow your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you right in the driver's seat. It can give you a much clearer picture of your finances, from your spending habits, your investments, and everything that you would usually need like a whole bunch of apps for. And it boils it all down into one easy, convenient app that tells you everything that you need to know. If you're sharing finances with somebody, if you're the kind of person with a joint account and you want to check in on that and make sure it all looks right, you can also find that at Monarch Money and get everybody on the same page so there's no confusion and way less stress. Knowing what's going on with your money means you don't have to be as stressed about your money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off of your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off of your first year. I think to understand the way anybody behaves as an adult, you probably should have at least a passing familiarity with how things were when they were a child. Those things don't excuse anything, but they do explain it. And those are two very distinct things that I think we sometimes conflate when somebody is explaining an idea. We mistake it for them trying to excuse an idea. But for Adrian Peterson, his childhood was made of pain. When he was a kid, he lost his childhood best friend in a car accident. Literally next to him. They were playing on their bike and a car came by, hit him, and that was it. He lost a brother. He lost a father. He played through physical pain, injury all the time. Adrian Peterson was in constant pain. And somebody who experienced as much tragedy as he experienced, to me, stands very little chance of growing up to be a normal guy. For Adrian Peterson, he channeled that pain into football. And for him, Adrian Peterson always had this thing where he refused to go down, right? And that's just good practice, just being a good running back, right? But it hits a little different because for Peterson, for any football player, when you're in the middle of a football play, between the whistles, that's all there is. You are no longer a child of divorce. You are no longer somebody who was abused as a kid. You are no longer somebody with a criminal rap sheet. You are no longer white. You're no longer black. You're no longer anything but the guy with the ball. And your job is nothing but to block, to catch, to run, to throw, to whatever, to tackle. There's a beauty and a purity to that. There's this like escape to it. Anything that you were that bothers you, you can't do anything about it until after this play anyways. So you might as well completely forget about it. And so it gives you a chance to forget about the things that hurt you. So of course you don't want to go down, because when you go down, the play is over and life comes back. When you go down, it ends. When the game is over, you have to go back into the world that hates you. I found this like poetic meaning to Adrian Peterson's play style when you really got to know it. But when you got to know him, you also got to know, of course, Adrian Peterson would be the kind of guy that thinks corporal punishment is good for a kid. Because that's how his mom raised him, that's how his grandma raised his mom, and so on and so forth. I probably don't have to tell you about that scandal with Adrian Peterson. In 2014, he pleads guilty. I think aggravated assault was the charge. Or no contest. I'm sorry, not guilty. No contest to an aggravated assault charge. He takes the indictment. He spends a year on the commissioner's exempt list. It's a whole thing. You remember it probably. And if not, you can go watch the history doc or look up the details on your own. It's something that I vehemently disagree with personally. I think he's very wrong about that. But I think you'd be remiss if you didn't understand that he would be as vehement as I am the other way. I don't think that makes him right, but it makes him easier to understand. And maybe we could do well to understand people who do things we don't understand and try to understand the people that did it. To go back to Randy Moss, when Randy Moss would step in front of the podium or when he would say things to a reporter like, straight cash homie, and he's kind of doing a bit. When he showed up to the Heisman ceremony in those sunglasses, he was kind of doing a bit. He wasn't trying to be funny per se, but he'll talk about that Heisman ceremony and those sunglasses he wore. He's wearing sunglasses indoors and he looks like this total diva. And he's saying it's because he didn't want people to look at how nervous he was, because he knew that the vultures would sink their beaks into it. So he gave them something else to sink their beaks into. It's not unlike the Buddy Ryan, all he does is catch touchdowns line that he said about Chris Carter, because the reason Buddy Ryan cut Chris Carter was because of cocaine addiction, and he didn't want that getting out into the media, so he gave them something else to chew on. And Chris Carter is grateful to Buddy Ryan for that line to this day. So if you ever want to make fun of Buddy Ryan for that line, just know he fell on a grenade for Chris Carter, and it worked. It helped him. It saved him, or was part of many things that saved him. Randy Moss has, I think, an entirely justified distrust of the media. The media, because of the way the media is constructed, there is a profit motive, as with all things that are, independent businesses. There's always a profit motive. It's always about making the most money possible, growing, especially if you're publicly traded. Now you have an obligation to grow and become a bigger version of yourself than you were before. You can't just do your thing, make your money, pay everybody, and go home. You have to grow. You have to constantly be seeking a bigger payday. And because of that incentive quickly grows to become more powerful than the actual purpose of journalism, which is to inform. The incentive to be informational is eclipsed by the incentive to be profitable. That is just a truism of journalism. Don't even say I'm getting political, because that's not really controversial. That's just what it is. And you can say, if you're a journalist, oh, well, I am resisting that incentive. I prioritize my being informative over being profitable. And good for you. You absolutely can do that. I like to think I do too. But I'd be lying if I said that incentive didn't exist and it wasn't something I have to constantly fight lest I become the next shock jock clickbait Andy. It's the way the business is. And it's the way the business was back then. It was at a much lower volume, back in 2001 or even the 90s when Randy Moss's bad media experiences were all happening. Look, you would have, every paper would write up their article on the high school fight that got the football player, in trouble. There would be a local paper, maybe a state paper, and that would be it, right? You'd have all the papers and their competing things would all write their articles, they would do their reporting, and then that would be that. And everybody would discuss it over the dinner table that night, and then the next night they'd be discussing something, whatever the next thing is. Now, there's 24-hour news cycles. There's, 15 article a day publications that need to find every little angle on every little thing to put a piece up about, because they're volume shooters, because they need to, make enough ad revenue to stay afloat as a business. There is this incentive to pump up volume, to post more articles about more things, talk about them for longer, keep people on your website longer, keep people looking at your ads longer, engagement time, hit rates, click-through rates, all of these stats and all of this pervasive incentive to grab and keep people's attention no matter what it takes. And it makes you super incentivized to sensationalize. It makes you want to evoke an emotion in people. You want your listeners, your readers, to be angry at someone. And how easy is it to be angry at the athlete that makes millions of dollars on a kid's game? That's Robert Smith's point. Robert Smith penned an op-ed in USA Today in 2002. I believe it was a baseball labor story was happening. I think they were striking or about to strike or something like that. And he wrote an op-ed in strong favor of the players and their union. He was in the NFLPA at the time, and made that point that athletes are specifically distrusted because there is this pervasive idea that they're making more money than they deserve to be making. They're playing a kid's game after all, and they're making millions to do it. Where do you get off asking for anything more? Look how good your life is, right? And his point is twofold. A, there are much more costs to it than the cost of your job, right? They put their bodies on the line, they put their brains on the line, CTE and all that. And they put their reputations in the public eye based on how they do at this kid's game. So the stakes are pretty high for them too. But more so, sports make money. Everyone sits down and watches the game all the time. If you ain't sitting down and watching the game all the time, watching all those commercials, sports wouldn't make as much money and the athletes wouldn't make as much money playing them. So it's kind of, you're watching, aren't you? And the NFLPA and the collective bargaining agreement that they had at the time and that they still have is based off of NFL revenue, right? If the NFL makes more money, the players make more money. So if you make the NFL money by watching, by gambling, by buying NFL Sunday ticket, by buying tickets to actual games, merch, all of that stuff, you are putting money into the athlete's pocket just as much as you're putting money into the NFL's pocket. I think that's a good thing. I think they deserve that they contribute their share of the product. They should get their share of the spoils. But it makes people really angry and it makes people really, really unfair. So if you are trying to get people angry so that they stay on your website and see all the GoDaddy ads, then your entire motive can be fulfilled by finding the right person to make into a villain and getting people mad at them. That is what Randy Moss will say happened to him. And I think it's either ironic or beautiful that he's in media now, depending on what you think about him, agreeing to be on NFL Countdown, which he's going back on, by the way, which is pretty good. That's great. He's feeling good enough to do that. But he and Adrian Peterson, I think, represent two sides of the same coin. It's always going to be so easy to make somebody a villain. And in some cases, they might deserve it. If you think that what Adrian Peterson did, if you're not a fan of corporal punishment like me, and you might think that Adrian Peterson deserves to be a villain. I'm not going to argue with you. But I don't think that Randy Moss deserves to be a villain. And I don't think he deserved to be a villain the whole time he was being really good at football. And I think if he was just okay at football, I don't think he would have been a villain. I think he would have been just another guy from Rand. And I think what emboldens me in this take about who should or shouldn't be a villain is how we feel with hindsight. With hindsight, very few people see Randy Moss as the guy that they were so mad at back in the early 2000s, right? Everybody looks back at Randy Moss with a fondness, for the most part, I'm sure. I mean, every take exists, right? So I'm sure there's plenty of people. But if you look back at Randy Moss and ask people to look back at Randy, oh my God, we all have his jersey. We loved watching him. We have all these memories. We'll share where we were when he did that one thing. With Adrian Peterson, people are a little more complicated. Yeah, I watched him play, but I don't like the person. That's a real thing. And it sort of proves that the things that everybody was mad about Randy Moss, they weren't real. We wanted a villain. And what's amazing about this is watching people try to pull the same move with Justin Jefferson, but be completely unable to. Let me explain next on Locked On Vikings. When Netflix's Receiver show came out last year, the sequel to their quarterback show, and it showed Justin Jefferson rehabbing his hamstring injury. It was, I thought, a pretty compelling sort of documentary side plot that was sort of the main conflict of his part of that show. And the reaction to Netflix's Receiver, Justin Jefferson part, I thought was fascinating. One of the most talked about moments happened right at the beginning. It was, I think, before the season even started. They were stretching. I think it was training camp. And Kevin O'Connell walks up to Justin Jefferson and makes some joke about like a chain he has. And then he says, oh, when I get the contract, wait till you see what I buy. And people thought that that was like contentious. People thought that he was like throwing a jab at Kevin O'Connell over the not having the contract yet. It was a joke about his chain. I think that this 20 years of marination in this media world where everything needs to be a thing because you have a 25 article quota to come into, it makes, so my buddy Tyler does this, right? Or did this for a long time where he has to write like this many articles for so long. And he complained about how much it made him, like scrape the bottom of the barrel of topics. And I think living in a media landscape like this for 20 years will do something to you, man. It's going to make you look at that interaction instead of going, funny joke. Those guys, those guys seem kind of fun. But the content brain makes you go, how can I make an angle out of that? Ooh, I bet I could sell that as, I wonder if that was maybe there was some subtext to it and like read stuff into it that isn't there. It is the exact same dynamic that made all of this Randy Moss molehills into mountains. But trying to do it with Justin Jefferson is so funny because it's so abundantly clear that that isn't the truth, that there is not a problem with Justin Jefferson ever, but he is flashy. He's a wide receiver. He's black. That's a part of this, and you can't tell me it's not. Therefore, he's a diva. He must be, right? I am so grateful for Justin Jefferson, specifically because he doesn't have a child abuse scandal. He doesn't have a long rap sheet. He is an entirely unproblematic goofball that loves to joke around with everybody, joke around about everything, and it is clearly calming to everybody. There was no contention, there was no stress or tension over that contract situation because Justin Jefferson was joking about it. Because he was laughing around and having a great time because everyone was comfortable enough with where they were at that they could have a laugh. So to watch the media try to turn that into this tortured, like twisted alternate narrative of a player on the verge of holding out was so bizarre to me and really showed me the true colors of media in a way that I don't think I was savvy enough when I was a kid to really pick out when it was happening to Randy Moss. And with Randy Moss, they had a much better point, right? Like he was like getting in trouble with the law. He was like, incurring charges. So it was a little bit of an easier sell. It's so different to watch the media try to do the same thing they did with a rap sheet, or somebody with a child abuse scandal who often said completely insane things and whose brain is completely impossible to pick apart, like Adrian Peterson, who is a very difficult person to understand. To watch them take the playbook that they had on those guys and then try to apply it to a guy whose biggest character flaws is that he might like Sour Patch Kids too much. It's wild. And I really find myself asking, what are the priorities here? What do you care about? How do you want a star football player to behave? Do you think that they shouldn't get a grill or wear a cool diamond chain with all the money that they earned for playing football? Do you think they shouldn't do that? Do you get annoyed when they do that? Does that bother you that they can afford a diamond thing because they play football? I really think you should look in the mirror and ask yourself if it bugs you. And if it does, why? Why does that bug you so much? Vikings football for my whole life has been defined by its superstars. And Randy Moss and Adrian Peterson have been the face of the team, the pillar of the team, the core of the team. And now it is Justin Jefferson. And maybe this will age terribly if in 5 years there's some big Justin Jefferson scandal, right? Fame and money changes people all the time. Maybe that happens here too. But as it is right now, if you look at everything that you can see from the Vikings organization, curated or otherwise, because some of the stuff the Vikings release, of course, that's curated, that's PR, that's whatever. But that's not all you see, right? You see Justin Jefferson courtside at the Wolves sharing Mike and Ike's with JJ McCarthy. Like, the candy thing is very real. Everyone can attest to that. Like, it's hilarious. But if you look at all of that and you see a problematic diva, ask yourself, am I just trying to relive the Randy Moss sense of superiority and satisfaction I got that I could look at somebody who was that good at what they did and say, I'm better than him because I don't have a rap sheet. I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm saying to make sure you aren't. I'll be back for real tomorrow. And as always, Skull.